The war between Israel and Hamas is our focus next. A White House envoy is speaking this morning after 2 days of talks with Israeli leaders. Jake Sullivan's mission is to convey this message from U.S. President Joe Biden.
I want them to be focused on how to save civilian lives, not stop going after Hamas, but be more careful.
This is video into us this morning from Rafah. The United Nations says more than 1 million Palestinians are attempting to shelter in that city. It's the furthest south they can go to escape the fighting. But Rafah is also being hit with airstrikes, and it is scenes like this that are behind the White House criticism of how Israel is now conducting the war. Biden was quoted this week as calling the bombing indiscriminate. Let's bring in Abby Kugathasan on the story this morning. Abby, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, as I mentioned, he's speaking to reporters today following 2 days of talks with Israeli leaders. What is he saying about Israel's assessment, the U.S. assessment of the war and Israel's conduct, and what he is conveying as far as a message from the Biden administration?
Heather, if any of the recent comments made by U.S. President Joe Biden, like we heard there, seem to be an indication of wavering support for Israel, it seems that Jake Sullivan is in Tel Aviv to squash those thoughts. He was in Tel Aviv making remarks, reiterating key messages out of Washington, and the first being that the United States fully supports Israel. This despite mounting international pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza. We know that the Benjamin Netanyahu government has rejected a ceasefire in Gaza. Netanyahu himself has said that this war will continue until there is absolute victory. The Israeli defense minister recently saying that this war could go on for months, and Sullivan today reiterating the American support by saying that they back Israel's timeline. Sullivan also spoke about the next phase of this war, what he called the next phase, that there would be more targeting of Hamas leadership. This could potentially look like reduced airstrikes and more ramped up ground operations against Hamas militants, but he did not get into those specifics, and he also didn't provide a timeline. Now, as of right now, more than 18,700 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. That is according to the Hamas-run health ministry there. The United Nations has previously said that the figures provided by this ministry are credible. We also know that the IDF has said it does everything it can to avoid civilian casualties, but it is worth mentioning that a leaked U.S. intelligence report suggests that nearly half of the 29,000 bombs dropped by the IDF on Gaza are imprecise dumb bombs, that they are unguided bombs. Again, Israel saying that they specifically target Hamas militants. Jake Sullivan in that press conference was asked about this. Here's what he had to say.
Israel selects targets and tries to distinguish between targets that hit Hamas and those that might take the lives of innocent civilians. At the end of the day, what we have consistently said is that Israel has the intent to make sure that it is drawing those distinctions clearly and in a sustainable way, and we want to see the results match up to that.
The next stop, Abby, for National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is talks with the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. He was asked about that as well at that briefing, talking about the future of Gaza, who would administer it the day after this war ends. What do we watch for in the discussions to come?
Heather, as Palestinians in Gaza worry about the next hour and the next days, we are seeing political talk about the political future of the enclave, as Sullivan making it very clear that the Americans don't think that Israel has any intention of occupying Gaza in the long term. Sullivan also reiterating the American position that the Palestinian people should have a say in their own future. And the U.S., as we know, has also said that the Palestinian Authority, which currently governs the occupied West Bank, could ultimately play a role in Gaza. Again, worth mentioning, the Netanyahu government has not been amiable to that idea. And we also know that Jake Sullivan, as you just said, is meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. They will talk about Gaza, but they will also talk about the settler violence in the occupied West Bank. And in the last little while, we are hearing that Canada, the United Kingdom, France, and Australia are calling on Israel to take steps to tackle settler violence, and that they're calling it unacceptable. I did speak with an analyst in D.C., Matt Duss, in the last 12 hours, talking about the overall peace process and the possible future for both Palestinians and Israelis. And he talked about the leverage that the Biden administration has over the Netanyahu government, given that the United States provides $3.8 billion in military funding annually, given that he says the United States provides diplomatic cover in international institutions, including in the United Nations Security Council, as we saw in recent days. But he said that Biden is not using that leverage. Let's have a listen.
There are ways to continue to support the U.S.-Israel relationship, as I do, that does not undermine the cause of human rights, that does not require continued unstinting support for the repression of Palestinians and the denial of their rights. This is not about simply being hostile to Israel. I reject anyone who would call it that. It's simply a recognition that, Israelis and Palestinians both have rights. They both have valid claims to a state under international law.
Now, the United States, Canada, and the European Union all back a two-state solution. Joe Biden saying recently that he doesn't believe Netanyahu wants that solution. So just asking a question that many globally are asking, what is the durable peace plan if it's not a two-state solution, Heather?
Abby, thank you very much. Abby Kugathas in Berlin.